I fundamentally disagree with the view that if you criticize somebody and they happen to be a different color skin, that makes it a racial criticism. In fact, he wasn't criticizing them. He was questioning whether he's an American. You saw from Congresswoman Presley this week that she was saying that if you're brown, you have to speak like a brown person. If you're black, you have to speak like a black person. That's the kind of ideology the president is rejecting.
Stephen Miller was the White House's choice to put on TV to defend Donald Trump's racist attacks against the squad this week. And like most Trump aides, he continued to deny that Donald Trump's attacks had anything to do with race. Here to discuss, Tiffany Cross of the Beat DC, E.J. Dionne, Washington Post columnist, Daniella Gibbs Léger from the Center for American Progress, and Jason Johnson from TheRoot.com. Now, Jason, you've been sitting for good 10 minutes thinking about this comment that was boiling inside of you like 10.5 minutes ago. And so I'm going to let you go first. You are going to be our first Sunday sound before, or you can do what you had to say and then respond to Stephen Miller.
It better be good.
And well, the pressure is high. I just don't want you to feel pressure.
It's high. I already feel judged by Tiffany. I'm ready for this.
So like I have like over 1 million Twitter followers. They're all expecting big things from you right now.
So first, I want to talk about Richard Spencer, right? Which is not a sentence that you've ever heard coming out of my mouth. But I need to talk about Richard Spencer because it has to do with this idea of how the 24-hour cable ecosystem decides who is and isn't an expert. Richard Spencer is not an expert. He's just a racist. You can go find one of those at an Uber driver. So this idea, and we see this happen all the time. Diamond and Silk aren't experts on black people. They're just two people with bad haircuts. So some of this has to do with editorial decisions. And look, I wouldn't ask Richard Spencer to come discuss racism any more than I would bring in R. Kelly to talk about Jeffrey Epstein, right? Like, they're the same kinds of people. So can we at least be more intelligent about who we bring in to discuss these issues? Now, with that being said, Stephen Miller is not only a racist and a white nationalist, but he does happen to work in the White House, so he has some insight. That is actually an expert. But I'm not surprised that he's saying what he's saying because Stephen Miller's politics and policies has always been very clear. And as we've seen every single time he goes on a Sunday show, his job is to push back and attack the media because he is playing for the audience of one, which is President Trump. So I'm not surprised by anything that he says or Mark Short says or anything else like that. They believe that this is a winning combination strategically and also morally. It is a moral imperative for them through immigration policy, through housing policy, through economic policy, to make America a whiter nation. They are white nationalists, and so therefore he's doing his job. It makes sense for him.
So did he live up to expectations, I want to know?
I think he did quite well. I'm quite proud of Jason. I think he did well. So I think now you don't have to worry about a tweet storm attacking you for not living it up. I think he did well. But I want to go to you first on this, and then I'm going to come down the line. But Daniella, or when the news Sunday shows all called the White House and said, can you send us somebody to talk about Donald Trump's racism, or they probably said his racially charged language.
Racially infused.
Racially infused language. Language that had a tinge of color in it. You know, his saucy language, his salty language. When they called and asked for that, the only person willing to go,
of course,
was him. I mean, it's a possibility that he's doing the speaking because he's all they've got.
And he believes deeply in what he's saying, just like Jason said. It's like, of course, you want to have somebody come out from the administration and talk about your racism and your white nationalist policies and send out the white nationalists.
Yeah.
And, you know, Stephen Miller, God bless him, he never does himself any favors when he goes on the show. But to Jason's point, it is an audience of one. He doesn't care what we think. It's just what Donald Trump thinks, and Donald Trump thinks he's a fighter.
Yeah, let's play a little bit more of him. Here's Chris Wallace, and who's actually taking him on this question of stoking racial division. Here it is.
I've never called any of his tweets racist, but there's no question that he is stoking racial divisions.
Chris, the core element of the president's philosophy is America first. Saying that America needs to improve to get closer to an America first ideal, as the president did as a candidate, criticizing Obama, criticizing our trade deals, our foreign policy deals, our immigration policies, is out of love for America. Saying, as Representative Ocasio-Cortez did, that illegal immigrants are in effect more American than Americans is fundamentally an anti-American statement.
Okay, so putting aside the lie at the end of that statement that, you know, they've never said that undocumented people are more American than America. That's stupid. Nobody ever said that. But the start of what Stephen Miller said I thought was very instructive. He says that the core of the element of the president's philosophy is America first, which when it was in the 1930s, that was a fascist idea. And so that's where the roots of it are. But Stephen Miller is writing the policies for the Trump administration, whose undercurrent is that this is a white nation and that there need to be fewer brown people in it, so they need to be deported, there need to be fewer Muslims in it, they need to be banned, there need to be no people coming from Central America, they need to be banned, no asylum seekers from Africa or the Central America, they need to be banned. That is white nationalism. And I think people freak out when you use the term white nationalism because it sounds like an epithet. But what it is that if you look up white nationalism in the dictionary, in Merriam-Webster's, it is a belief that this country or any country that a white nationalist is in is a white country, and that anything added to it is not of that country. That's what he just said.
And you know what the great irony here is if you go back to the immigration of groups we now think of as white, starting with the Irish and then going through Italians, Jews, Poles, others from Southern Europe, the anti-immigration people then were trying to otherize them by saying they were people of color.
Right.
So people here who are white, who descend from people everybody now agrees are white, when they got here, this same racial line was going on. Trump has started with his racism a fundamental debate about what it means to be American. America first, he said. You're right. The roots of that were in opposition to getting in the war against Hitler. But his America is defined not to include immigrants and not to include people of color. And let's just state the obvious. If you tell 4 women of color, 3 of whom were born here, that you should go back to where you came from, a kind of street bully epithet, that is racist.
Right. Yes.
And there's no denying it. And they want to have it both ways. They want to say, we weren't being racist, but by the way, we have the same definition of what it means to be American as you do, white nationalist or backlash person. And they can't, I think they had a bad week because, Trump had to change his tune more than usual. He went forward, then back, then forward again, and they know they've got a problem.
Well, I call that a full Charlottesville at this point. Yes. That's what he did, right? I mean, the emperor's new clothes, he's now completely new.
I think it's even worse, maybe.
It is, because here's the thing, is that, we didn't even have immigration laws in this country, until like the late 1800s, right?
When the Chinese, we went first.
Right, we went to try to, and they were always to exclude people, and it was to free white Americans. You could come in. We had open borders to white people. Yeah. So essentially we had open borders. You could just come, show up in America, and eventually they would matriculate you into being white, then you could come. And the only ways to stop it were to say that Southern Europeans weren't white enough, that Italians weren't white enough, right?
50
Build a wall
cents
against
you had to pay, which was about $12 now, basically.
Right. And so the point is that this argument that we can only be the America we used to be if we have closed borders, that's the opposite of how white Americans got here, right? So that makes no sense. Yeah. But Donald Trump really has revealed something, which is not just the racism. That's the stuff he's been doing. That is white nationalism, is it not? To say this is a white country, and if you're not white, you're not really American. Like you're not really French if you're from North Africa. You live in France, but you're not French. That's what we've always criticized about the way that Europe used to operate.
Yeah, I think this is something that his supporters, and we have to start calling his supporters racist as well. That MAGA symbol has come to represent something. It is the new Nazi symbol. It is the new hood, the Klan hood. So I think they don't feel comfortable describing themselves that way, and so this president has to say, oh, no, you guys don't worry about it because this is what I mean. And when he says America first, he means white America first. And that's something that racism is so ingrained in this country that when you criticize it, people feel like you're criticized, you're not a patriot. And I think particularly for black people, we have such a complicated history with this country. We're no less patriots. We've always known who this country was. When people say this isn't who we are, isn't it though? This racism is as American as apple pie. Yeah. But we love this country for the promise of what the country could be. And if I may just address what Spencer said, or not Spencer, I get them so confused. Stephen Miller said about Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley. She was not saying that you have to talk like a brown person. She was saying we don't need people in Congress who show up with brown faces who don't want to be brown voices, with black faces who don't want to be black voices, because we all know the two are not always the same. I mean, you can take Omarosa, for example. She was a black face in this administration. I don't know that I would describe her as a black voice. You can take the new Omarosa, Candace Owens, whatever her name is. She is a black face. She certainly isn't a black voice. And so I don't want him to have the opportunity to misconstrue what she's saying. And even his language itself was very racist. The term illegal immigrant is overwhelmingly offensive. And even that comes with...
And it's outdated.
It's outdated,
right,
and so
exactly.
Congressman Joaquin Castro, chair of the Hispanic Caucus, introduced legislation this week to remove it from the federal government's lexicon, so we can start having a more inclusive government and live up to what the promise of what America's supposed to be.
Absolutely, yeah, it's an outdated term. In media, we don't use it anymore, and it used to be a very common thing. So let me play one more clip of Stephen Miller, and this was talking about the way that Donald Trump used to talk about America when the president was black, when it was President Obama. Take a listen.
He wrote, "The United States, under President Obama, has truly become the gang that couldn't shoot straight. Everything he touches turns to garbage." Stephen, that isn't AOC. That's Donald J. Trump.
Throughout this interview, Chris, you're continuing to conflate Donald Trump's criticisms of President Obama versus AOC's deep and systemic criticisms of the country itself.
Daniella?
Ooh, don't curse, don't curse, don't curse. I mean, are you kidding me? Like, Donald Trump, he should leave by his own standards, because he used to criticize, as we saw right there, this country under Obama all the time, because he could not stomach the fact that it was led by a black person. And again, Stephen Miller, God bless him, he tried, but you cannot erase the words that were right there and in front of us. You know, I just have to say, I want to piggyback on something that Tiffany said again, that for black Americans, our relationship with this country is very complicated. My parents are immigrants. I'm a first-generation American. This past week has been really, really difficult. But I will take a backseat to no one when it comes to loving this country, and with that love comes the right to criticize everybody, including the president.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's built into our whole way of being from the very beginning.
Yeah, that's the whole point of it. Okay, well, Tiffany, EJ, and Jason, hold it in. We're going to come right back. You guys can come back. Daniella Gibbs Léger, thank you very much for being here and for being here in America. We appreciate you. We appreciate the crowd. All of us, the brown folks, we ain't leaving. Before we go to break, we do have to say goodbye to somebody who Daniella Gibbs Léger is stealing. She's taking her away from us because he's going to work with you. Here's Dwayne Green. Let's embarrass him. Put him on TV so his mom can see the shame that he's leaving AM Joy. How dare you leave us? How dare you? How dare you? How dare you? I'm going to come to your office and visit you unannounced.